we started understanding about what are the list of anonymous blocks that we can create, and what are the how to handle the exceptions, what are the predefined exceptions, and what are the user-defined exceptions. And we have also seen how to raise the exceptions and all those things. So far, whatever we have discussed, it's called as an anonymous block. So what do you mean by anonymous block is that a program which does not have any name, that is called as your anonymous block. So it does not have any name, and even when you're actually writing this program, and this program will not be stored in your database. It will not be stored, as and when you run it, it will compile at the runtime, and then it will not be stored at the runtime. I mean, it will not be stored in the database. So that is what is generally happens. So when you take a look at the next one, so what we are going to discuss about other type of methods, that is called as a stored procedure or a function, or it is also a stored function you can call, which will get stored in the database. So whenever you define or whenever you want to invoke from Informatica Power Center or from any other applications like Java and all the other things, so basically what we do is we'll invoke that from the we'll define a stored procedure and we'll invoke it from today. So now we'll see now how can we define a stored procedure and how can we pass the arguments to the stored procedure when we are invoking it. So basically you'll come to know you'll actually create it and pass the different parameters which are associated with it. So now in this we'll understand what is a procedure and what is the function, or procedures and functions are also called as a subprograms in Informatica. So these are the PLSQL named blocks. So what is the difference between the anonymous blocks and the subprograms is that one is an unnamed PLSQL block and the next one is a named PLSQL block, and it is compiled every time. This is compiled only once. I hope you understand the difference. What do you mean by compilation and execution? Compilation is nothing but it will basically check whether it is syntactically correct or not, whatever the program that you have written, all those things. But when it comes to execution, it basically performs the operation or whatever you are trying to do. And this is not stored in the database, and this is stored in the database, cannot be invoked by any other application. That's what I said. So you cannot invoke anonymous block from any other applications like Java, .NET, Informatica, MDM, or OBIE, BI Publisher, or anywhere. Like if you just want to invoke, you cannot do that. So named, therefore it can be invoked by the other applications. It cannot return the values, and in case of a function it must return the values. Cannot take the parameters. Basically you cannot pass any input to the anonymous block. But in case of subprograms, you can pass the parameters to that. So that's how we define the procedure. I mean, that's how we differentiate the anonymous block and all those things. So let's try to write a stored procedure. Okay. So we're writing a stored procedure which is basically adding a department to the department table, adding a department. So how do you add a department to the department table? So how can you pass the parameters and how can you define them? Also those things we'll try to discuss now. So basically whenever you are creating a stored procedure, so I mean first we need to understand how to pass the parameters, to the procedure. It's basically that procedure what we do it. Let's say when you take a look at it, how to pass the parameters. So how it works is like parameters can be passed, or parameter arguments can be of three types. One is a input mode, in-out mode, and another is a output mode. If you define a parameter as an input, that means that parameter can serve only as an input, can serve only as an input, to the this one. And when you take a look at the in-out, it will, both the ways it will work. You can pass the input, pass the input, and at the same time you can get the output from that parameter. So we'll see that how it works as well. If you're defining only as an out parameter, that means you can only fetch the output from that, fetch the output. So this is where you actually pass input to that. So let me just go here and we have a student table. So like now what I'll do is student table is actually having three columns, and I want to add a record to the student table. So how do I add it? And at the end I want to understand whether the procedure is successfully executed or it is having an error, or if it finds any error, that I want to understand. So if you see, we have on the student ID, we have a unique constraint, student underscore UK. So which is a unique key, I think. Yeah, it's a unique key that, and we also have a primary key. So no, it's on the student ID column we have a primary key which is defined. So now I'm showing you an example wherein we'll write a stored procedure. And we'll add the record to the student table by writing the stored procedure. See, basically when we discussed about the SQL part, I have shown you just to write how to add the data by using an insert statement. But now in this case today, what we are going to do is we are going to write a stored procedure. Through the stored procedure, I'll add a record to the student table. Okay. So if at all we find any error, it will return an error for us, like what is the error that it is facing. So what is the details that you're going to use? So whenever you're preparing, or whenever you are creating a stored procedure, you need to use something like that: create or replace, and which you're creating a procedure. We'll talk about what is the difference between a procedure and a function later. Procedure, let's say you are basically adding a procedure to add a record to the student table. So I call this as a add underscore student. Okay, add underscore student. Let's say I want to pass the student ID. So basically I don't want to pass the student ID. So there may be a case that we might have already the sequence, and I want to make use of that sequence directly to fetch it. Okay, we don't have a sequence value. What I'll do is I'll create a sequence and make use of that sequence to do it, or else we can pass for now. So first one is, let's say, student ID. So whenever you're defining a parameter, it's always starts with p underscore student ID, which it is there. So p student ID, let's say in, and this is an input parameter, which means it will work only as an input to it. So by default, even if you don't specify any argument mode for a parameter, it will be an input. So p student ID, let's say input, and you want to actually define this as student dot, let's say, student ID and the percentage type, student ID and the percentage type. So that is one parameter. Another parameter which I want to add is a p underscore student name. So basically this is also an input parameter. So I'll define that as student dot student name percentage type, which it is there. And the next one is p underscore SSN number. So it's basically the SSN. This is also an input, and which I define it as, either you can define as a percentage type attribute, or you can define that as a let's say SSN is going to be the varchar2, so I'm going to define it as a varchar2. See, one thing that you have to remember is that while writing a stored procedure, while defining a parameters for stored procedure, you should not provide the precision here, just like the way how you do it while creating a tables and all those things. Precision should not be provided. So let's close it, and this you can use a keyword as is or as, anything is fine. And here you use the begin statement, and this is going to be the end statement. So declaration keyword here is an optional one. Either you can use a declare keyword, or you can just straight away start declaring this thing. So you're ending this stored procedure, so you'll always use end of add student. It's just that from this to this is a same anonymous block that you write. It's only the thing is that you'll write stored procedure to do this. Let me just try to add it, and I'll also define another output parameter, basically, which I call it as p underscore error message. In case while inserting the data, if it finds any error, I want to see that error message to see that. So which I call it as a varchar2. So error message, which I will assign it. So let's see that now how we can handle it. Okay. So declaration section, I don't think I need any other variable to start proceed for this. Here in the begin block, I'll write a statement saying that insert into, let's say you want to insert the data into the student table, so student, and you'll provide the column names. So it's basically the student ID and student name. So basically the student name, and then the SSN also, which is there, SSN, and you'll define a values. You'll define a values to it, values. Let's say the student ID is this one, p underscore student ID. Let's say the student name is going to be this, and then the SSN is going to be this. So while inserting the data, so generally once you insert it, I want this data to be committed to the database. So just commit it. In case while adding the data, let's say you have an error. Basically I want to capture that error message. So when I write this using this when others, I don't know what kind of error I'll get. That's why I'm directly using the when others, and assign that error message to the p underscore error message. So just write p underscore error message is equal to SQL ERRM. So SQL ERRM is nothing but the error message associated with the Oracle error. So this is your first stored procedure which you have written. And if I repeat what we have done here is that I've actually defined 4 parameters. 3 of them is input and 1 is a output parameter. So basically we are going to pass the student ID, name, SSN and the error message, and I don't basically need any variables here. That's why I'm not declaring, or you can just declare whatever the variables that you want and do it. So let's try to compile this stored procedure. See, whenever you compile the stored procedure, during the compilation itself, irrespective of whether it is having an error or it doesn't have an error, this stored procedure will get saved onto your data dictionary tables. We talked about data dictionaries, right? System tables. It will get saved onto this. So select what procedure you want to compile. Say just click F9. So it says that procedure add student is compiled. That means I'm able to compile my stored procedure and it is successfully compiled. If you're having any error here, basically it will throw the error, and you can also find out the error from there. Okay, so this way you'll compile it. Let's say you want to see where I can find the stored procedure. You can go to the connections. let's say under the connections, if you go to procedures, here you're going to see the procedure, that is your add student. So this is a procedure which you have compiled now, and it is successfully compiled here. So this is how you can compile a stored procedure. Now whenever, as I said, a stored procedure is a stored or a named PLSQL block where it is getting saved. I want to know. So if you want to know where the source code is actually saved, you can query that. So there is a data dictionary or the system table called as a select star from user underscore source. So this is where all your PLSQL procedures package, every code will get saved. So what is a name of the object what we have actually compiled is where name is equal to add underscore. So add underscore, let's say student. So if you try to query it, it will give you the code what you have compiled. See here. So when I see this here, if you see, this is a code that we have compiled. Each and every line that you have compiled basically is basically saved into this. So this is more about the this is more on the compiling the stored procedure where it will there. So we have a question here, like what is that is stands for? Why are we using this is? So this is basically you're trying to prepare a statement, create this stored procedure is with this contents. So is like a syntax that we follow for creating the stored procedure after defining the parameters. It's a syntax. So either you can use is keyword or as keyword. So anything is fine. So that you have to do it, right? So this way you will actually define this one. Next thing is, now you have compiled the stored procedure. So how do I execute that? So is it that when you compile the stored procedure the data will get added? No. So you're just compiling the program. Whenever you execute the program, then only the data will get added to the system. So how do you run that using a SQL developer? Let's say if you have to, okay. So how do you run the SQL? How do you test the stored procedure? So how can you invoke the stored procedure? Okay, let's say stored procedures can be invoked from, so if you see, stored procedures can be invoked from, so where and all you will invoke it. So when you say, first thing is you're going to invoke from any Java applications or any enterprise applications or .NET applications, we will invoke it. And at the same time, as I said, you can also invoke from the anonymous block. You can also invoke the stored procedure from anonymous block if you want to test it. Next one is you can invoke from Informatica Power Center. We'll see this. How can we invoke from Informatica Power Center? Basically, once we go to Power Center part, we will understand. So yes, SQL ERRM is a predefined Oracle error message for Oracle errors. So yesterday we have seen SQL exceptions. When we are handling the exceptions, SQL ERRM is a predefined variable that always stores the Oracle errors. So Informatica Power Center and different other places we do it. So what is the real-time use of creating the stored procedures and functions? That we'll understand. This is just that still we are at the basic level. I'll go and then give you the real-time use cases where we use that where we can invoke the Informatica. So now let's say if I want to execute this, so basically how did I get into the screen? You go to the connection tab and just go to the procedures and double click on it, it will open up. So to execute the stored procedure, just click on this run or control F10. So when you click on F10, it automatically generates the anonymous block for you. See, this is an anonymous block wherein to test your stored procedure, you need to pass the input from here. So let's say the student ID, I'm passing the student ID, I'm passing the values. Basically the student ID is a number, so I'm passing it as 256785. And the student name, let's say I want to define this as Pratap, and the SSN number which it is there, it's just an alphanumeric. So what I'm going to do is BPR, let's say 56784A, something like this. So this is an SSN number which I am passing. So basically it will initialize these values with the appropriate data what I have passed, and the same inputs will be passed to your stored procedure. So there are two ways to invoke the stored procedure in the anonymous block also. One is by parameter mode, another is by the position mode. So we'll always go by the parameter. Basically the student ID will be replaced with 256785 and the student name will be replaced by Pratap and this. So if there is an error message, that error message will be printed here. So I want that message to be printed. So let me just print that message as well. So I want to see that in case if you have, okay, so let's see. So basically we'll see that how the error message will appear. So let me just run it now, see how it works. So when I click on OK, so basically this will give me the error message in case if it returns any error message. Okay, there is an error, and what is this? So try to click on OK now. It shows connected to the database SQL process exited, disconnecting from database SQL. If you want to see any messages, there are no messages in the log, and now the record should have been added. So let's go to SQL and then query it. So I want to query the student table and see whether my student ID with 256785 is added to this. So try to use it. So this is a student which I have added, and there is an error, and this SSN number is also being added. So if you have to test the stored procedure, one thing is that you have to invoke that from the anonymous block to test it. So either you can write the anonymous block on your own, or you can just click on this run, it will generate anonymous block for you and then test it. So this is how we'll write it. Now let's try to observe the scenario where it returns the error message for me, and I want to see that error message as part of my this one. So in this scenario what I'll do is I'm going to write my own anonymous block and then invoke that stored procedure. Let's say begin and end. And what is a stored procedure name? It's basically the add underscore student. Whenever you are invoking from the anonymous block, you need to know the list of parameters and how many parameters are input and how many parameters are output parameters that you need to know. In order to proceed, I need one variable for capturing the error message from this. So I'll define one variable called as a v underscore error message, so which could be of varchar 2 of, let's say, some 4000. This is my varchar field. Basically I just want to see the other way around, like when you see the invocation of stored procedure, this is by the parameter mode, means each and every parameter you are passing. So you can also pass it as a position mode. Position means if you pass the first value, that will take it as a student ID. So let's say I'm passing again a 256785 because I want to see the error what is returned from the my stored procedure. Let's say student name, let's say I'll give it as Sai, and let's say the SSN number, let's just GYTRE and 675. So that is my SSN number, and I want to capture that error message. So when you want to capture the error message, you need to basically pass the any variable port to do that. So just go here and pass that variable message. So how your procedure will understand now this will be the student ID because the first parameter is student ID. Second one is student name, so it will assign that to this one, and the SSN is that. So when you try to execute, let's say I want to even print this DBMS message, basically if at all, if it returns any error, since it is a primary key, obviously it will return me an error, right? So exception from the stored procedure or error message is this. So when you concatenate it, basically you'll combine that error message to this one. So we'll try to do this. So let me try and execute this one. When you try and execute, it's basically it will try to add the one more student with the same student ID, and which will result in an error, and that error message will be captured into this error message variable, and that will be printed after executing. So let me just try and execute now. See, this is error aura 001, a unique constraint is violated. That is an error which is returned from your stored procedure. So you can capture the error message in case if your v underscore error message is null, means there is no error. If there is an error in the v underscore error message, that means there is something wrong with your stored procedure. So if it is not null, that means it's errored out. If it is null, that is there is an error which it is returned. So suppose, let's say if I just give another 5, and then okay, let me not disturb this. I'll take another example to invoke it. Instead of doing this, I'll add another 6, okay, which is a unique one. So if I try to do that, now v underscore error message, what happens? Error message will be null. It doesn't have the error message. So just try to do that. Anonymous block is completed. There is no error message because that is being committed to the database. And if you want to verify whether that record is added, you can query the student table, and now the student table has this value Sai, and then the SSN number is this. So this is one example for a stored procedure. One example for a stored procedure to start the stored procedure one. So this is how we use we write a stored procedure and get the different errors. So this is how we write a simple stored procedure, and if you have to invoke the stored procedure, that we do it from the anonymous block and then do it, right? So any questions before we step into the functions? Right. So likewise, you can add n number of stored procedures, and let's say I want to write another stored procedure which to delete the student from a student table. I want to add that. So how do I create another stored procedure? Basically, if you take a look at it, so this is another example which we are looking at, and delete a student from stored procedure. So basically, what do you need for deleting a student? And I need only the student ID. So based on the student ID, I'll delete the student from the student table. So create or replace the stored procedure, create or replace a procedure. We need to write the procedure. What is the procedure that you want to write? So it's basically the deleting of the student which it is there, right? So deleting of a student from a student table. What is the input that it takes? It basically takes yes, student ID as an input. So we are going to write it as p underscore student ID. So this is like an input, or let's say you define it as an inout. Inout means you can pass the input to it, and at the same time you can pass the output as well. So, and let's say this I'm defining it as student dot student ID percentage type. You know what is a percentage type attribute mean, right? And another attribute which I want to get is p underscore error message or an exception message. So basically I want to throw an error message saying that if the student does not exist, then I want to throw the error message to the business user saying that okay, the student ID 100 do not exist in the student table, something like that. I want to throw the error message. So this I want to define it as a varchar2. So now do it. Let's say is, and you have the next one. Let's say I need some kind of a variable port. Let's see that if it require a variable. Let's get started first. So begin and end. So exception block. So we'll always write an exception, right? So this is here I'm going to write a statement. So this is a DML statement again. So delete from student where let's say the student ID is equal to p underscore student ID, p underscore student ID, which it is there. So student ID. So we are going to delete from the student and this one. So in case if I use something like this, SQL percentage row count, if it is equal to 0, what does that mean? So if the row count is 0, that means none of the records have been deleted from it. So whenever if you have such kind of a, so I'm passing the student ID to delete it, but my procedure doesn't have that student to delete the value. So in that case I can raise the exception. So how to raise the exception message? Using the method raise application error. Yesterday we have seen this. Raise application error. So here I want to pass it as 20001 and here I'll write the message as student with student p underscore student ID does not exist in the student table. That's what I just want to raise a message to the business user saying that okay, does not exist. So I want to raise this kind of a message whenever row count is equal to 0. If that is not the case, then I want to commit the data. Commit means it's completely commit the data. And in case of any errors, when others, then I want to actually write all my error message to the SQL ERRM. I'll just initialize this, that's it. Whenever there is an error, my SQL ERRM will be the error message. I'm just assigning that and I'll come to know what is that SQL error message that is being sent from this one. So what we are doing, we are just passing the student ID, and I also want to print the student ID in the out. I mean basically in out means you can pass the input, at the same time you can get the output as well. So let me try to compile this stored procedure. It's another stored procedure that we are looking at. So try to use this. Yes, we got an error. Now we need to check what is this. Okay, it's what, where is this one, not as this one. Let's go here and after end if, so this is the value. So let me just try to execute it one more time. So this time procedure delete student is compiled. Do you think it is compiled without any errors? So try to refresh by clicking on the procedures, and now you'll see that delete student is a procedure which you have. So when you try to edit it, so this is basically is having a student ID name and then the error message, and you're actually printing it. I want to test this stored procedure from this one. So how do I do that? Let me execute the stored procedure basically from this. So how do I run this? So when you take a look at it, let's say I'll write an anonymous block, begin. Yes, you can also, yeah, you can use, if you want to display the output in the DBMS output, basically you can use it, because if you want to print something and all, you can always use it. There is no restriction. But because when you start invoking from Informatica and all, it basically writes the output into the console. But that console, you cannot see that from if you're invoking from any Java application or Informatica. That console output will not be displayed when the procedure returns any error. Console output is just only for at the Oracle level. When you are executing, you can see that DBMS output. But the DBMS output is not visible if you are invoking, if you are basically invoking it from the Java application or anything. So let me just try to invoke it by using a anonymous block, so which I call it as begin and end. So let's say if I use a delete student procedure, basically it is taking the student and what is the ID. Let's try to give the ID which is not existing, and I need a v error message. So let me declare the v error message. So v underscore error message, basically I'll write it as varchar2 of, let's say varchar2 of some 4000. So basically how we do it, 4000, and do that. So when you try to use a delete statement, if it is returning any error, this I can pass it. So I want to print that error message in case if it is DBMS output dot put underscore line. So basically the put underscore line, so which I want to print this error message only. If at all, if it is there, it will print, otherwise it will be null. So let me try and execute. Now we should get an error, right? So because if you go and take a look at the student table 999, I don't think we have any student with that. So if the student is not there, when it is deleting it, your this condition will be evaluated to true, and this should throw the error for me saying that student 999 does not exist. That is what the error I should get when I execute this. So let me just try and do this. Yes, okay. So we got the error here. Expression 999 cannot be used as an assignment target. Okay, so let's go it and then understand what is the error here. So where are we assigning the value? Cannot be used as an assignment target. P error message is out, and so what is the error here? Whether it is in the anonymous block which is returning, okay, delete a student. Okay, this is an in-out variable.
Not right, yeah.
Yeah. So this is an in-out variable, that's why it is not able to capture it. I have to change this one. Let's say v underscore error. Let's say this is your student ID, right? So I am going to initialize the student ID as number. What is happening, the error is that this student ID is actually the in-out parameter. I cannot actually directly pass the value because it is also returning some value in case it might return from the procedure, but in this case we are not returning anything. So when you try to do this, basically you can assign this one. So if you want to pass this, basically if you want to print v student ID, now this will work. So let's try to execute, and this is throwing me the error saying that Aura 20001 student 999 does not exist because you are passing 999 which is not present. Now let's try to pass something which is existing here. Okay, so let's say let me do not disturb this, and I'll again use one more anonymous block basically to execute this one again here. So if you use an anonymous block, let's say 256785, this time the record should be deleted. and we use this. So anonymous block is completed. So do you think that record would have been deleted? Yes. So let's go and check now and see the record is being deleted from this student table. So this is how we can write a stored procedure for a different purposes. So we have just seen an option of writing a DML statement inside a stored procedure. So you can also do by writing a DDL statement. That is where most of the things we are going to learn. We are least bothered about adding a student, deleting a student. These kind of operations your Informatica Power Center can do. You don't need really a stored procedure to do that, and you don't need to invoke that from Informatica again. So mainly we are going to use the stored procedures for dropping the indexes by using a dynamic SQL, as I said in the last class. So tomorrow we will understand like how we can create a dynamic SQL for performing all the DDL activities which is required for which is required in a data warehousing project. So that is where we'll concentrate more, and this is another example how we can write a stored procedure and then do that. I mean, how we can write a stored procedure and invoke it. All right. So I hope now this has given you a comfort in understanding complete stored procedures, right? These are all called as a standalone stored procedures. Standalone stored procedures. So when you go for it, basically the next thing that I'm going for is about the function. Basically, when you go for a function, you need to understand first the difference between the stored procedure and a function. Let's say when you talk about the stored procedure, it is also a named block, may or may not return the data. It may return it or may not return the data using this, may not return the data. And stored procedure cannot be invoked from SQL statement, cannot be invoked from SQL query, or select statement cannot be invoked from select statement. You cannot do that from a select statement. But functions, when you talk about the functions must return a value, something or the other. It must return a value. Without returning any result, you cannot actually write a function. So that is the main difference. So how do you return a value in the function? With the help of a return keyword. With the help of a return keyword, we are going to use that function, and let's say must return a value, and it is going to be used. So it can be invoked from your SQL statement, can be invoked from your select statement, whatever is there. So you can mute yourself, please. Can be invoked from the select statement, and this is the main difference between a procedure, PLSQL procedure, and a function. So basically, when you take a look at the procedure or a function, let's try to write one function now. Basically, you want to calculate the annual salary or check salary. I don't know what it is doing. Basically, it is taking a department ID and all. You're initializing the employee number and you're calculating all the values from it, and you're also bringing the average salary. If the salary is greater than average salary, then you're returning the value as true. If else, you're returning a value as false, and then you're writing it. Okay, let's take a look at the better example. It doesn't make so invoking a function. Next one, yeah, this, let's take a look at this. Okay, so it is basically taking the employee number as a input, and it is returning you the Boolean value, and you're basically finding out if the salary is greater than average salary. So this way you're trying to pass some variable and then understanding whether the salary is greater than average salary or less than average salary, and I'll show you how to invoke that from the anonymous block, and at the same time how that can be invoked from the select statement. We see both of them. So let's say let's try to take the same example. Basically what I'm trying to do, I'll pass the employee number as an input, and we'll basically we'll get the salary for that employee, and we'll also calculate the average salary for that department. Basically, if I'm passing 100 belongs to the department number 90, and I know the 100 salary is 24,000, and I'm going to compute the average salary of a 90 department. So let's say the 90 department is some average salary is 19,000 some value, and I'm going to compare whether this 24,000 is greater than this. If that salary is greater than that, then I'm returning some boolean value, or you can return a varchar value, or you can return a number value. Anything is fine, or you can even return a null value as well. So I'm returning true, true, else I'm returning a false. If there is an exception, then I'm returning that value as a null. Okay, so let's try to define a function. Yes, concentrate here. It's only the syntax difference is that you find when you're creating a function. Create or replace the function. Basically the function name that you're going to use is about the checking of the salary column. So when you use a check salary, basically that here we are going to pass the employee number as an input. Employee number, let's say input. So I define this as employees dot employee ID percentage type. So I call this as a percentage type, and I'm passing only the one argument to it. So, and you must write the statement, that is your return statement. So let's say I want to return a number, so I'll write it as a number. Anyway, the boolean is being written over there. I'll just return a number. If it is 1, the salary is greater than that. If it is 0, salary is less than that. If it is null, means that no data found. So is, you need to write a is. So only the difference between that and this is return type, and then instead of a procedure you need to pass the function. So now I need few variables here. One is your average salary. So average salary, I'm going to define it as employees dot salary percentage type, and I also need a v underscore salary. So this is also of a similar type. I need this variable. I'm defining all my required variables in the declaration section, and I need a department ID. So it basically, the department ID is a type of this value, employees dot department underscore ID percentage type, and what and all you require. Let's say employee number, anyway you can pass it directly, and employee and everything. Okay, that's fine. So let's try to first, we know that implicit cursor, right? Yes, declaration, you don't need it. Basically the declare keyword is a kind of an optional one. If you want to keep it, you can keep it, or if you just want to leave that declaration keyword, you can do that. So even here in this example, if you see, there is no declaration keyword. I can even write it in case, even if you write, it doesn't throw any error. You can still do that. So even in previous examples also, I never written the declaration section, basically because we haven't define anything, but you don't require that. So now we got this. I'm going to use an implicit cursor and fetch department ID and the salary of an employee based on the employee number. So how do you write it? So select, let's say select what are the columns that you want, salary comma department underscore ID, into what are the variables that you want to get. So I want to get into v underscore salary comma v underscore department ID from, let's say, what is the table from which you are reading the data, that is employees table, and where employee ID is equal to, let's say P underscore employee number, what you're passing from the input. So just use this. And let's say if now we are also going to calculate the average salary. So this statement, what basically it is helping you is that finding the department ID and the salary of an employee. So this is what it is doing, salary of an employee. So based on the department ID returned by the above query or above cursor, I'll calculate the average salary of that department. So how do you calculate average salary? Select average of salary from employees into, let's say, V underscore average salary from, let's say, employees table. So where department ID is equal to the department ID which you have fetched in the this guy. So department ID of that guy. So now you compute you have the salary in the V salary column and average salary in the, so here I have to, sorry, this is wrong. You don't require it. Average salary in the V average salary column. In case if V underscore salary is greater than is greater than V average salary, so then basically what I want to write is return 1. So if you are returning 1, it basically that means the salary is more than average salary. So else, and if, so return 0. So basically what happens is that in the exception block there may be a chance of no data found exception, right? So whenever you pass an employee number, let's say employee number itself is not existing in the employees table, it returns a no data found exception. So what you have to do if there is a no data found exception, so you can write the condition as in case of any other errors, group by, do you require a group by? Can somebody answer this? Do you really require a group by here?
No.
Not required, because I'm not selecting any department ID in my select list. Go back to your thumb rule. If you're using any if you're using any columns which are not part of aggregate function, then that column must be present in the group by clause. But I don't have any other column, right? It's just that only one column that is part of aggregate function, so you don't need it. So
Karthik, one question. Here you are using exception. I mean, convenience which you used for the last time for the procedure SQL percent row count equal to 0 and no data found.
Yes, you can write it. Basically, when you are writing this, when no data found, you do this. When others do this, anything can be written. So let's say when no data found is there, I just want to return -1 value. Basically that one. So or I'm expecting that it's only the no data found exception, or let's say you have when others. In others case, I want to see for a function return is must, whether it is an exception block or it is a return block in the execution. Return statement is must.
Okay, what about this one? If SQL percent row count equal to 0, then we have put rise underscore application error, right? So
no. What actually happens? See, if you're actually getting a no data found exception here, your next statement will not get executed. It will directly jump to the exception block. So if you're writing some statement here saying that SQL percentage row count is equal to 0, do this, it will not work, because the statement what you're writing in 1/12th line will not get executed, because from here itself your control is passed to exception. It will never get executed. So
can we say DMH statements we can put SQL percent row count equal to 0? And
yes, because the DMH statement will never throw the no data found exception, right? It doesn't throw it. It always gives you some output. It doesn't throw when you are updating it, when you are deleting it, it never throws. So that's the reason SQL percentage row count irrespective of whether your DML statement is successful or unsuccessful, your next statement will get executed because it doesn't throw the no data
Okay.
found exception. So that's pretty much it. So this is my function. What I'm doing is basically I'm passing the employee number and computing the average salary of that department employee and the employee. If it is greater than this, that's what we are doing. So now try to compile it. Okay, there is a too many errors. Okay, let's go back. Declare, it is not accepting, it is not liking it some reason. Okay, let me just take out. I don't think this is required. So let me again compile it by deleting that. What it is doing, compiler log. Okay, so now the function is compiled. That means, yeah, basically one thing is that a declare keyword doesn't work over there. That's what was an error which we were getting, and we should not use it. But I think I was, maybe I might be wrong. Okay, so let's see now where the functions will get stored. Basically, if you see, all the functions will get stored over here. When you go to the function list, you'll be able to see the salary and whatever it is. So just like the way how you executed a procedure, you can also execute the function and then see the return result. What is the return result from here, and then find out the return value. Let's try to execute it from here. Let's say in the employee number, 100 is my employee number. I know that 100 average salary is greater than the department average salary, and this output value should return 1 for me. Let's check that. Where can I see the output variable? See here, return, it has returned the value as 1. And if I go for a same query again, let's say pass this time 101, I know that 101 employee average salary is less than the average salary of their department. So it should return me 0 now. Let's see that whether it is returning 0 or not. So because I know the data, that's why I'm able to conclude the things, that whether it is returning me the 1 or it is returning me the 0. So we just need not to worry much like how I'm coming to know about it. So this way you can invoke it. One best thing about the function is that it can be invoked from a select statement if it does not contain any DML statements in it. It can be invoked if your function is not doing any changes to the database or any modifications to any tables. It can be always invoked from the your select statements. In this, we'll see that this function, how can I invoke from the anonymous block? Basically, I write the declare statement and I need a function output. Let's say I call it as func output. So this is going to be the number, and this is going to be the begin. So basically, what is difference between the function invocation and the procedure invocation is that so when you use this function output, like let's say whenever you're invoking the function, you must assign that value return type to the some variable, otherwise this will not work. Basically what I'm trying to say here is, let's say check underscore salary. So what it is taking, it is taking basically the employee number as an input. So if you go here, let's say end, I'm just, let's say, printing that we return type or whatever. So if you try to, okay, let me just try directly execute this and show you. This invocation is wrong thing. If you throw, it will throw the error. So basically, check salary is not a procedure, or it is undefined. What does that mean? Basically, it is treating this check salary as a procedure because you're not actually catching the return type. So function always returns the some value. That value must be assigned to this something like this. So then only it will work. Let me just print it. DBMS output dot put underscore line. So it basically use the function output. So try to execute this. So now see, anonymous block is completed and the action is 1, which means it is there. Let's try to pass the employee number which is not existing. This is an employee number, it's not existing there. So when you try to write, so it's basically returning -1 because it is going to the no data found exception and it is returning -1 for you. So that's how we do it. So this is pretty much about the functions, how to invoke it from the anonymous block. Basically, let me just invoke that from the select statement. How do you do that? So what input it is taking, my function? It is basically taking the employee number as an input. So how do I invoke from the select statement? So select last name, salary, and let's say I want to invoke this check of salary. Directly you can call this check of salary, and basically what it is taking the employee ID as an input, right? So I'll just pass employee ID as an input, and from employees, so basically what it gives me the either 1 or 0 based upon this one. So that means wherever I have a 0, that means the average salary is less than, employee salary is less than the average salary of a company, average salary of a department, and wherever it is 1, the average salary of this employee is more than the department average salary. If I want to find out only the employees whose average salary is more than their department average salary, so if I can use something like this. So if I write this, it will give me only the employees who are actually whose average salary. Can we alias that stored function? Yes, you can do it, no issues. Let's say what I would like to give it as, let's say, okay, let's call it as employees salary or something. You can even alias it, it doesn't make much difference, so you can do that. But same alias name cannot be used here, right? As you know, aliases cannot be referred in the where clause, but it can be referred only in the order by clause. So this is how we can do it. So in case if your function is actually having some DML statement or some DDL statement, then that cannot be invoked from the your SQL statement. So one note that you have to understand is that function cannot be invoked from the select statement, from select statement if it contains any DML or a DDL statements. So if it is changing anything on the database, you cannot invoke it from the select statement. So that's one thing which you got. So this is more on the is there any naming convention that we have to follow in assigning? Yes, basically, which talks about, let's say if in the other case when we decided deleting a student, that's what the general naming convention. For procedures and all, I think it starts with P. If it is a function, it starts with F. That's a general naming convention that we follow, and to do that. So this is more about the functions, how we talk about the different style of, different functions which are available in it. And then, so we are actually going at the basic level of PLSQL training, or you can call yourself as a medium or more than a beginner level that you're actually learning in the PLSQL. You're not actually learning PLSQL at the expert level. So what I would say is that if you have any jobs with respect to the PLSQL developer, sole PLSQL developer, then you may not be able to fit that job basically, because we are learning the PLSQL at the very high level, wherein these are all the very basics in the PLSQL. There are a lot of advanced things which will also some advanced things about the dynamic SQL and all. We'll see that in the probably in the next class. Now if you have any questions, probably you can go ahead now, and I'm going to show you the next level, that is how can we talk about the compiling of the function, I mean packages. What do you mean by a package, or how can I get the package definitions and all. I think I don't have that in my statement here. See, generally the packages are the another type of an objects, or which in are there any important differences between the Oracle 10G, 11G and 12C? There are a lot of features which have been added to that, but in terms of a programming, yes, there are a lot of changes which have happened from 10G to 11G. Basically that we probably have to refer some document and then read out. But important changes are not very high level changes. If you write a program in 10G, the same program will function even in 11G, but additionally you can make use of the additional programs. That is what we call it as an advanced SQL, but where we are not learning about it. 12C, I think 10G and 11G stands for a grid computing. 12C, which the cloud version of that, and 12C is like a cloud one, which has a cloud architecture and all. So let me give me a moment. Let me download that fifth chapter. Package is nothing but if you're actually combining all the subprograms like your procedures, functions and all those things into a single unit, that is called as a package. So basically the package will consist of two components. One is called as a package specification and another is called as a body. So package specification means in the package specification you will actually mention all the structure of your variables and then the procedures and then the functions. So one is when you talk about packages, and which should have, the first one is about the specification and another is called as a body, which it is there. So when you take a look at the specification, what it contains, it declares the public types, variables, constants and all those things. So basically whatever you declare in the specification, that becomes a public variable, means it can be accessed anywhere within your Oracle database. If you are declaring anything in the package specification, that becomes a public. If you are declaring anything in the body, that becomes only the private. Means if it is present in both the places, it's basically a public. If it is present only in the body, that becomes a private part. So if you see package, body and all those things. So we'll try to compile a stored procedure. We'll try to compile the packages. One package we'll try to develop. Basically, now whatever that we have created, these standalone stored procedures, basically I'll just use the same standalone stored procedures and I'll keep it as part of a package and I'll drop all of them. So what should I do now for creating the package? So always do remember, first you need to compile the specification. First you need to compile the specification, then you need to compile the body. Specification, and you need to compile the next one is about the body that you have to compile. Right. So unless the package specification is free from compilation errors, you cannot compile the body. It means you need to first successfully compile the specification, then the body. So how do you first create a specification? This is the one, create or replace package. So if you're not using the keyword body keyword, that means you're compiling this package specification. So what is a name? Let's say I call it as my first package. My first package is and end of that package. So end of that package. Inside this you can declare any variables, any kind of arrays, varrays, anything can be done inside this. You have to do that. So you'll create a subprograms, everything can be done. So in order to do that, either you can go by this approach. I'll show you the SQL developer how you have to create as well. So in order to do that, now what I'll do is I'll declare one variable called as, let's say, commission for an employee. So which is of number data type. Let's say if you are declaring in the package specification, that becomes a global variable. I'm just showing you how to define a variable in the package specification. That's it. So let me add now whatever the procedures that we have written. So in the package specification, we don't write a body. We'll write only the specification. Specification is nothing but specification is nothing but just only the structure of, or a method structure which you are going to define. So similarly, let's say for check salary also, I want to keep it as part of the package body. Or if you are actually keeping package specification, that means it's a public. So if I'm defining both delete student procedure and check salary procedure, in both of them in the package specification, that means it's a public one. So if you have to do that, similarly if you have to define a body, so it's the same way that we define. So you don't need to define let's try to do that. So package body, you have to write the body, and let's say when you talk about the delete student, so we'll completely write this stored procedure itself. Complete stored procedure, will keep it as part of the body. So this is for one. Similarly for a check salary, we'll also do this one, just a complete body, complete specification as well as a body. So both of them will compile. And now what I'll do is add student procedure. Basically I'm adding only in the package body. I'm not adding this in the package specification. Now you need to tell me whether it is a private or a public. So if you see, I'm adding only in the package body. I'm not adding this in the package specification. Does it throws me the error, or it will just compile? So first let me compile this. If you compile this, now this package is compiled. If you want to check it whether it is having a syntax errors or something, you can go here, always go to the packages, my first package. This is a package which I have defined. So you're able to see delete student and check salary is because these are all public, and v commission is also a global variable. Next, once your package specification is compiled properly, then you go and compile the package body. So first specification always, then the body. Without specification, can we define a package body? No. But vice versa is correct. When you say that you can define a package specification without a package body, that works. But you cannot define a package body without a package specification. Okay. So let me write it to avoid your confusion. Basically now if you go and check, you should have the body as well for this package. So this is a package body, what you have written, and everything is being compiled as part of it. So whenever, basically this is how you write it. Let me conclude this today's class with one statement. Okay. So what is this is, let's say package body cannot exist without the specification. Without the specification, but package specification can be defined without the body. So this can be done. So this is the way. Tomorrow we'll understand more about what is the uses of the package and why do we need to go for a package instead of defining a standalone procedures and functions, the way how we have created all these. So why do we need to go to this ones? Like basically I'll just drop these procedures and functions. Anyway, I will let it be. So we are going to talk about the advantages of the packages in the tomorrow's class, and at the same time we are also going to understand the dynamic SQL. So that we'll see that, and this is basically the PLSQL procedures, functions, and the packages. So this you can try and compile till this part. See, because since your deadlines are very tight, we are actually covering a lot of syllabus here. So you need to practice. Unless if you're practicing, it will be really difficult once you go back and then do it. So make sure that you allocate some time and practice it, because as soon as we complete with the PLSQL, then we'll start with Informatica right away.